say welcome.
Oops.
Welcome to Building on Relationships to Catch Our Pandemic Stories. It is 12:02 in Massachusetts, USA. Today is day 3 of the Education as Relating Conference. We are in session number E1, and our presenters are Sandy Brower, Charlene Desire, Max Schiller, Tararehl, who is not here. She's on an airplane flying from England. I am Marge Schiller, and what we're going to share is the result of over 40 conversations that began around January 2020. So Charlene, I think you're next.
Okay, so the COVID season and the pandemic season was a wake-up call in many ways. And, Mark gave us a quote, we are not defined by the time of the pandemics, but we can be redefined by them. So this is a time of opportunity. So we are inviting you to be in conversation with us. The presentation has a couple of goals. We created a guide to capture the stories of the pandemic. So one of the aspects that we will present are aspects of this guide. And we're going to invite you as we go through the session to make comments about what you're hearing and the reactions of what you're hearing. And this is an opportunity to also bring you in dialogue and conversation around storytelling and story making and story building. So we will have a relational opportunity of exchanges, inviting you to write in the chat and to also come and speak with us. So thank you so much for deciding to come to our session.
So Sandy, why is this important?
Thank you very much. Just a heads up as we go through these current pandemics examples, please share in the chat any that resonate with you, anything that you've experienced. So to know, share, and collect our stories. Thinking about stories, everybody's story is important. And oftentimes when I think about sharing stories and autobiographies, I always think of Anne Frank and her telling her story for the whole world to hear. And stories aren't just for those people who are prominent members of our society, but I think they're for everybody. And everybody needs to share their story. So for me, the one that touched me the most was the stress, the ill-being, and the education piece. I am in education. I'm a K-12 well-being coordinator. And for me, the COVID incident for a year and a half totally disrupted our educational system. And coming back this year, the biggest difficulty that students has was that transition back into the classroom setting, the school buildings, after being away for a year and a half. Their behaviors were difficult to manage. They had a difficult time settling in, being under the authority of adults again. So that was difficult for them. And the teachers had a difficult time handling the behaviors of the students. And then they had a lot of other issues that they had to worry about. We had supply chain disruptions, so they didn't have the supplies they needed. We had tech glitches. We had the personal struggles that the teachers were going through COVID. They were overwhelmed. And not only that, but they were concerned about the students' social emotional well-being as well. So that's where it kind of hit home for me, is being observing all of this and being in the environment of the school, and seeing the difficulties that other people were managing. Charlene, would you like to share?
Sure. I think the COVID virus itself became a vibration of other pandemics, as Sandy explained, that was happening around the world. COVID gave a global lens, eyeglasses, so people started to look and refine their focus on all the other pandemics that were associated with COVID. And for me, I'm a university professor in a school of education. And in my particular department, the students are predominantly of African descent. They're predominantly Black. The faculty is predominantly white. And as we all together struggled about, we had to adjust because our school is a 12-month. So we had to adjust. Everyone had to go online. So it was a rapid attention to what we had to do collectively as a globe. But there was also another social pandemic happening, a racial pandemic happening. When Mr. Floyd, when he was distinguished, his breath was distinguished in this life, our school had no response, despite our student population was 70% of color, 60% were Black students, and there was no response. And that invisibility caused more. And it showed us that there's a social pandemic happening. And this leaves us ill-prepared for healing. So the healing that we must take has multiple prongs that we cannot not touch and hold and be in conversation in a relational way for healing. And I pass it on to Max.
Well, as we've seen in this pandemic, economic inequalities have also been enlarged as people at the top gain more and more money, and so many people have difficulty finding work. And as a culture, as the majority, it's important for us to communicate and learn more about each other to better address these inequalities.
Thanks, Max. I get two topics. The first one is COVID. And the important thing to me about a framework for what's happening is that COVID, in some weird way, has shown us we live in one world. There is no escaping that. There's no escaping that COVID has shown us a connection, threads of connection that we, some of us were not willing to acknowledge. But the political polarization is certainly a large sense of them and us in the world. And in that is political polarization and them and us an aspect of being human? I don't know. It's an interesting question. What has become, and I come out of the world of politics and government, and what has become complex to me is that, I'm going to use a lot of C words, that collaboration is a dirty word. And yet in this, to get us, there's an exchange that is important. So as we look at what's going on in the world, where do we see the examples and aspects of political collaboration, political of co-construction, and of the understanding that in order to move forward, we must be colleagues? Maybe not exactly brothers, sisters, etc., but at least cousins in this world that needs and will have a serious question. Are we going to stay transactional, or are we going to move to transformational? Next comes Charlene and Max.
Oh, you're muted, Charlene.
Storytelling and story catching. This is our lived history. How do we create history? Do we live in the past? In order to live in the present time, we have to document the present time. And that present time will lead us into a future that is built upon the lessons learned. So the storytelling aspect is very important during this sacred time. I call it a sacred time. COVID has opened up a universal consciousness of that we need to be well. And how do we protect ourselves to be well? So in this present sacred time of COVID awareness, how can we catch these stories? How do we catch these stories and crystallize them? And as a relational, intergenerational team that we are inviting you to be in that energy with us and to acknowledge that this is a sacred time. And we are the ones that are the lived experience, the embodied experience of wellness. And we have to catch the story, tell the story, exchange the story, and document the story. So this is what this session is about, is to feel that energy and let it vibrate through you. Next slide. So as we thought about this process, we thought about how do we have an inclusive understanding of the significance of catching stories. And we had these teachers that just bubbled up for us that really captured this idea. And we're all going to talk a little bit about these particular quotes and how they integrate with our own personal story. Next slide. Okay, so the first quote is Maya Angelou. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And I'm going to cover the first two, and the second one by Jean-Luc Godard. Sometimes reality is too complex. Stories give it form. And when I think about this, you know, I think about my first and greatest teacher, my grandmother. And she was born in Haiti at a time where there was a US occupation. And she became orphaned at birth. And for her legacy, she told us her story. I would sit at her feet and she would tell me the story. And she created this magical world of relationships that she had with her ancestors and said, I will worship my ancestors so that you will know that I will be your ancestor. And that shifted in me the importance of documenting stories because her legacy runs through me. My inheritance is the stories that she laid in my mind, in my heart, in my spirit. And in doing that, I became a qualitative researcher. I teach how to contain and catch stories of people. This is what I do for a job. So we must understand the magnificence of what it is to capture live stories. And so Marge will see the next one. You're on mute.
Stories have wings. Stories have wings, and grandmother's stories have wings. I think about my grandmother, and I think that now my proudest title is I'm a professional grandmother. That's what I do. Because we talk a lot about the hero's journey. That's a metaphor or notion from Campbell's work that many of us are familiar with. There's also a notion of the heroine's journey. And the heroine's journey is a journey of stories because stories are sticky. So I applaud the telling and the capturing and the knowing of your story and the stories of others. Max, you're next.
A people without history is like the wind on the buffalo grass. I interpret this quote as meaning as without history, without stories, that's the real substance behind us and our relationships. We aren't going to last and we aren't going to make a real impact on the world.
Beautiful. You're never going to kill storytelling because it's built into the human plan. We come with it. That's what Margaret Atwood said. And I absolutely love that quote because it's so true. Our brains are built to make meaning. And our stories help us to understand ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. It helps us to make those personal connections with one another. We are absolutely wired to tell stories. It's a part of who we are, and sharing those stories can be so beautiful.
Okay, so we have an invitation for you. It's number 6, yeah. And that is to know your own story. When this project started literally a couple of years ago, and literally talking to at least 40 people from different parts of the world, for me, it started with knowing my own story. I've done an awful lot of interesting things in my life, and yet I found that my pandemic story is my 62-year relationship with my husband. And it's a very contained story. It's a small story, but it's a story that has given me a north light, a place to follow. My husband is going to be 89, and he has some severe limitations, not mentally, but physically. And so I am a caregiver. And a caregiver is somebody who has the opportunity to live kindness and to live love. And so my story is a very contained story, but it tells me what I have to do, when I have to do it, and why I have to do it. And if I were going to make it into a song, I'd say, my song, my story is all you need is love. How about you, Charlene?
Yes. So, how do we catch our stories? Next slide. How do we catch our stories? And who is your we? Who is your we? Because we don't tell our stories by ourselves, right? It's an individual process. It's an interpersonal process, and it's a collective process. Not only do we lift ourselves up in catching our story and catching other people's story, but we bring up those who surround us, those who connect with us, our ancestry, those who are family by choice, both the communities within we live and breathe through. And these are just examples that we have here of different ways that you catch your stories. Who are you with? Who are you with in your being and telling? And as I think about this, last summer I decided to go back to Haiti, my native land, and I do summer programming for youth. And I use Appreciative Inquiry as this tool to begin to have not only conversations with them, but to have the students build the curriculum, and also to have an intergenerational lens. I was in Haiti the day that the president was assassinated. And that morning we sat there and chanted Om. I brought in other traditions that linked to me. So we created this story and documented the story. And we think of these stories as a patch weaving. And Marge, can you talk about that in the next slide?
Sure. First of all, I want to acknowledge what John Meje said, because this notion of family or who is your we is very significant to us. And my story was a small family story. Charlene's story is a much larger world story. But I've got a quote here from Annie Lamott, who's a writer, who says, "The reason life works is that not everyone in your tribe is nuts on the same day." So this notion that we are family, but we're within our family, we also have major differences. We are not all in the same boat. We are in the same ocean, but owning our own stories and hearing the stories of others is imperative to understand this quilt or mosaic of experience. I think that the imperative nature, as you said earlier, Charlene, of the documentation of stories cannot be discounted. I thought for a while this was the most important time in my life, But I wonder if this is not the most important time in our lives, our ancestors' lives, and living memory. Let's go to the next one.
What is our legacy? You know, we've been taught that this legacy game is an inheritance that may be of knowledge, maybe of monies, maybe of property, but our legacy is our very vibration, the very essence of who we are and how we tell it and walk it and speak it, and how we're aligned with who we are and who we want to be. So there's many ways to talk about our stories, right? You know, I wear African clothes a lot. I'm telling my story, my ancestral story, as I move in this world, known or unknown, right? And we can do that in a lot of different ways: art, poetry, the kindness, speaking in your own language. There's all these different ways. So now we want to invite you in a relational exchange to think about this, and you know, as we prepare. And again, remember, this is part of this is really to get your feedback around a guide that was created to help us have a framework in how to capture and tell these stories. Max, can you please put in the chat the URL? So we are inviting you, you know, to build the library of us telling and ways to capture stories. We want you to be a resource in telling stories. And so we will have a URL throughout this presentation and afterwards where you will be linked to an email. Well, you will be linked to a website where you would put your email, agree to participate. You will get a copy of the guide that we created. And, you know, and we want you to build on what we're doing here and to include your legacy, to include your words of wisdom on what we're creating and what you're experiencing with us here today. When you go on this site and you agree, you will get our emails. So we encourage you to send the emails and give us feedback in a sacred relational exchange. So next slide. So, you know, these are just tips, you know, and these are limited to our understanding. And you have joined, you know, us in conversation, and we want to invite you to share with us, to build that library, to go on the website and also add to the tips in terms of how do you invite people to tell their story? How do you hold hand? How have you healed during this time of the pandemic? Okay. So I think we're ready. We're ready to invite you to interact with us in the chat. So each story catches an experience that is unique, that is interpersonal, and that is collective. So your uniqueness gives me an opportunity to see the world in another way, or to align or to be complementary to my story. So we're going to use this time, and I'm going to invite Sandy to write some guiding questions as we invite you to respond to them in the chat. Who is your we? Who is in your community? And what are the aspects of your community that influences your stories? So we want to engage you for about 2 minutes, just to think about this. And since we're a small group, our invited guests, if you want, you can also share with us as well, if you feel comfortable. So we invite.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello. Myself Sandeep. I'm from India. I have a story. Students during the pandemic period. Can you hear me?
Yes, somebody needs to mute themselves.
No, you have some noise in the background a little bit, but
Yes, it's okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I have a story of a student who migrated from the pandemic. The condition is not very good. Uh, he went with his family from his native place, and as an educator, as a teacher, I contact telephonically from this student because teaching learning process is going on through technology, but I can't trace this guy. But unfortunately, I connect with these students because they are very poor people. They don't know about the technology. But fortunately, I connect with the telephonically. Then I ask these friends, you want to continue your study? He says, yes, sir. He said me, sir, how can be possible this? I said, I give you small work with the help of WhatsApp if available in your family member's phone. He says, yes, sir, I can manage this. So I bring some work after some time, little work with the help of the WhatsApp, and he responded me after taking some time. So we can connect with my student with this help of the technology during this period. It's a story. It's very touchable for me. It's enough for my side.
Okay. I mean, what I heard you say, and maybe you could write a little bit of it in the chat, is that you work in a remote area and you use your students as to teach them to document, and they go back to their homes, and so it's building relationships and conversation with your students so that they can go back to their homes and community. And it would be great if you could write that a little bit in the chat so we can document it. So again, so this idea of catching stories, you know, it shouldn't be a hierarchy, because if we're teachers, we have to be great students. And we have to
sorry for the interruption. This story is long, not for me.
Right.
So many stories like this exist at this time because I discuss many teachers about these stories, but most of the teachers have this type of stories. But
yes. So I mean, in the interest of time, you know, I want to acknowledge how important teachers are, in telling and capturing the stories. So, you know, if you could write a few bullet points on that, and we're going.
I have.
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption.
No problem.
I have one more.
Yes, because we have to move on to Max. Is going to talk a little bit more, that's going to highlight exactly what you said. So we're going to have Max go next to kind of highlight what you said around how we can use our own me power, we power, and do power as you are doing. So Max, can you share the next slides with us?
I have another story about my students.
We're gonna, I'm sorry, we're gonna have another opportunity to share. So like, we're gonna
exactly.
We're gonna come back to you. All right, so Max.
Yes, exactly. I can wait, ma'am. I can wait.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the 4 powers and this book that I helped write with my grandma, Marjorie Schiller. So a lot of what we talked about here today is contained within the ideas of appreciative inquiry, of looking for everybody's stories and trying to bring it together into a bigger whole. And so this book is a lot about that. Next slide, please. So here's a video of my sister Sarah reading it. I'm probably not going to put the time. I'll just. Can someone just mute? Who's the host?
People need to mute.
Please,
Would you make
yeah.
me co-host? Because thank you.
Okay, thank you for muting. Thank you. Go
All
ahead.
right. We're probably going to skip this in the interest of time, but here's a video of my sister reading the book just to show you how intergenerational this was. We're going to get to the 4 powers. Next slide. So you'll probably see the connections to what we talked about earlier, but the book is talking about these 4 powers: do power, me power, see power, and we power. And they all work together. Here are a few little ideas to get you familiar. So there's do power, which is the idea of going out and putting things in action. Me power, which is more introspection. See power, which is imagination and being able to think of new things. And we power is working together. If you go to the next slide, there's more specifics. Me power is discovering in yourself. See power is dreaming for what you can do. We power is working together to design. And do power is, of course, doing. And just to express, we all have the powers. We all have all 4 of these within ourselves. And I want to pass the question to you on how you can use these and how these apply to what we've been talking about. The next slide, yeah. So continuing to pass on the question, when have you used me powers? So when have you looked for your own strengths, and when have you kind of like said something straight from the heart? See power, when have you been able to think of new ideas and introduce original thoughts? We power, when have you worked together with your family and friends to be a part of a bigger whole or do something meaningful? And do power, when have you taken initiative and really made change?
Thank you, Max. So we'd like to take just a couple of minutes. We don't have too much time, but we'd like to take a couple of minutes to invite others to please share either live or in the chat a little bit about their story. Are you coming from the lens of your me power? What powers did you use to help in your story? What me powers in your story did you use? Or what see power did you have? What was it that you saw that you would like to work on to make better? Who's your we? So who is your we? Who did you work with? Who is part of your story? And then what did you do?
Next slide. You're on mute, Marge.
You're muted, Marge.
There's a lot of good stuff in the chat room.
Yes. Max, do
Let's
you
take a
wanna-
look at the chat. Yeah.
As I look at the chat, we have there may be several factors which influence storytelling, story catching, and is also subject in nature. So nature grounds our stories, time, location, nature, if it's vision, perception, mindset, or a person, and it's far away from reality. So the story is here and present, but it makes us play with reality. And everyone has their own version. It's these unique stories that really puts us together. So I don't know if Sandy or Marge wants to talk a little bit more about this invitation to continue to share the stories.
Well, Sandy started out talking about kindness, and we can frame this pandemic in multiple ways, but certainly a snapshot for me has been around kindness, just enormous opportunities for kindness. So as we look to this future, one of the things I want to keep on doing and feeling and experiencing is kindness. I feel it myself, and I want to spread it out. Something I want to start doing is stop doing as much. I want to start by stopping. I think this is a time of so much information, so much input, so many opportunities, so many possibilities, that it seems to me that I want to start by stop doing some of the things that are interested in get to the real important. So perhaps some of you will put into your chat some of your thoughts about this. What's next?
Well, I just wanted to comment too a little bit more on acts of kindness. I think it's so important that we teach our children so that they understand the importance of kindness, and actually even share with them the science behind kindness. I mean,
Yes.
anytime we are kind to ourselves or to other people, it releases that that feel-good hormone called oxytocin. And oxytocin is actually they call it the heart hormone, because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel warm and giving towards other people. And that leads to our happiness, our joy, and it also builds relationships. So I think kindness, when you stop to think about it, is really a big deal. It sparks our relationships, it sparks our connections, and it keeps us connected with one another. And it's just so important for our own happiness, our own health, and our own well-being. And then I just wanted to also comment that that all this change, COVID, to me, brought about the opportunity to make changes, to build out relationships, to reach out to other people, because it was such a, COVID affected everybody in the whole world. It didn't just affect one continent or one state or one province. It affected the whole world. And for me, some people think it's kind of a bleak and depressive time, but it really isn't. It's if we think about it, it's our opportunity to make big changes, to come together and connect with one another and make the changes that we really want to see. Just like Mahatma Gandhi said, the change really starts with you. It starts with me, and it starts with you.
Next slide.
So Max, let's you and I talk about this one. I'll start, and please you add. Knowing your own story. And people have been reluctant to do this, because I believe we are all so fragmented. We're fragmented, and we're in a fragmented world where people are just having so much churning and things that are going on. But knowing your central story, knowing what's important to you. Charlene, you had a word for your central story. I don't want to try to remember it. Do you remember?
Is it service?
Well, it was service with love, if I remember. Service with love.
I mean, as we think of kindness, for me, love is the verb. Love is the verb that binds us to our healing. So I commit to service with love.
And I have a full-time occupation with a husband who truly, we tell each other we love each other all the time. So mine is a little mini and yours is a big maxi, as it were. But also to hear other people's stories. We used to say, do unto others as they would do unto you. Well, it doesn't make any sense. Do unto others in context of their stories, of who they are. And Max is a history buff, so I'll say one more thing and then please you chime in, Max. I've been part of major world events, World War II, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, being against the Vietnam War. And I was in New York during 9/11, and it changed me because it made me see the importance of young people. I'll tell you the story another time. I don't want to. Well, actually, I do have time to tell you. So I'm in New York. I'm talking to a bunch of hotel executives, and the senior vice president walks in and says the World Trade Centers have been hit. And I had just said, is then the same as now? Because these hotel executives were talking about issues of hospitality industry. Well, of course, we shut down our program, and this hotel had people in the World Trade Centers who were staying in their hotels and meeting at the World Trade Centers. So at that time, the hotel also thought that we might be having people from medical people coming in from different parts of the United States. Well, I ended up taking care of Rachel, who was a 3-year-old, and because her mother had to go onto a crisis committee. As I walked her around the office, what I observed is that people who were crying stopped crying, people who were frozen unfroze, and this 3-year-old with her big eyes and her squeaky little voice, that the image of voice of hope when you don't know what else is going to happen is in young people. And so to preserve our stories for young people, for the next generations and generations to come, and we're the only ones who can tell it. Nobody else can tell my story but me. Max, talk about history and Hamilton.
I will. So often I hear from my classmates that they don't understand the meaning of history or why we learn it. And a lot of what we talked about is history just on a smaller scale, much like the past kind of makes up so much of the world today, and it's inseparable. Our personal past, even if we don't think of them, pretty much make up the entirety of who we are today. So thinking about that and understanding that through the form of stories is pretty much the only way we can come to understand ourselves and actually do any of the things we seek to do.
I agree.
Nicely said. Very nicely said. All right, we will move on to our last slide.
And then we'll have a chance to open up larger. Now, Charlene, have you left us?
Yes, I'm about to leave. I have
All right,
another.
well, take a minute to say goodbye.
Yes, thank you so much for joining this session. You know, for me, my first teaching from my grandmother was the significance of stories. You know, she was an orphan. She never learned to read and write, but the art of storytelling was the best inheritance that I could get. So thank you for being part of our conversation. We invite you to continue the dialogue. Go on our website and share your knowledge with us.
So let's talk for a minute about why we started this and how we would like to continue it. I think this is a big honking deal. And if you go onto this site, you will see a guide that is really just meant to be a prototype. Our hope is that in different settings, that whether it be your family, your organization, your religious affiliation, your sports team, that you will modify this guide to make it something that's useful for your group. We also would like to make ourselves available to you. You can get in touch with, if you click on this, you'll get a link and you'll get a way to be in touch with any of us if we can be of support to you. So for the remainder of our time, what we would really like to know is, so what do you think? And can you talk to us about your sense of finding, catching, and making public the stories of this unique time? Who'd like to talk?
Either in the chat or in voice.
Mhm.
I see a true man from Sandy. Can you give us some feedback? We'd be very grateful.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm here to see you. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I think that everybody has different stories because starting of the life, you hear so many stories in your family, your grandmother, grandfather, and after that you went to school. You hear so many stories with your friends. Then you go in college. You went in the college. You hear so many stories with your friends, with your colleagues, and after that, you when you went in your working place, you also hear so many stories.
Mhm.
So everyone has so many stories, but some stories emphasize your sorry. So different stories impact in your life. In at the time when you need advice, anybody, so you can think like that story. My grandmother says that, like you can correlate these stories with the different circumstances, and you get answers with himself. So stories is a very important part of our life. I think that.
Mhm. Beautiful. Sandeep, let me ask you a question. I totally agree with you that stories are a huge part of our life, and each person has a number of stories
Yes.
that they can tell. How do you feel about recording your story? Like pick one story that you could share with other people. What story would it be, and how would you share it?
Yes, ma'am. I have a story with my students when I was teaching class third or fourth. My one student is very brilliant, but their father, their family is was very poor now. They don't know about the talent of their son. But I recognize their talent, and I appreciate in my class always to do much better. Then I guide them. So he's a very responsive student. Then he passed the exam with the very nice manner. So their parents don't know what he achieved. So then I call them and I advise them, you send your son in this type of a school, and he can do much better, uh, much better. But they uh, after my advice, they agree to send their student in higher study for next step. So this student is done better in life. He's he's on the way not get his target, but I felt very I want to say today this story is very inspiring for me. I teach my students with the help of this story. If a poor parents can achieve a target, so every normal student can get easily.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate hearing that.
What I appreciate the most is what you just said about the relationship with your stories, because I think telling your story when you don't have a relationship with somebody is much harder. And my hope is that some of us continue to build a relationship, because that's how we will get to our stories.
Beautiful. Yes. I see we have a comment in the chat from Ramesh. Ramesh, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Ramesh shares that life is a story in itself. And that is so true. Life is a story, is one huge big story. It's almost, it reminds me of the comment, life is a stage, and you tell your story on that stage.
I also appreciated the idea of it's like the chapters of a story. You know, there's a chapter I'm a little kid with my grandparent, and then I'm in school with the story. So the stage on which the story occurs affects the story.
Most definitely. I like how you said that, Marge, about it's like each person has a different chapter in their life, a different story to share.
Stories have impact of their life.
Say that again?
Different stories affected your life.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's a big part of the story, is how did that event or that person in that story have an impact on me and my life? You know, was it meaningful? Did I learn anything from it? What meaning do I get out of it? You know, that's going to help me in my life, you know, to move on or to see things differently, to have a different perspective.
You can get answers your problems with the help of the stories.
Right. Yes, exactly. And especially, I know with our youth group, when we talk with our teenagers, we share our story with them so that they can relate to us and learn from us something that we've already been through that they're going through right now.
Also, I think when you said that, Ramesh, about the false stories we sometimes have told ourselves.
Ma'am, I want to say one thing.
Yes.
Yes, can I?
Yes.
You must try to read Indian traditional stories, Panchtantra. Are you hear about it?
Yes, I am I am not a Brahma Kumari, but I am I go to India, to Mount Abu, because I have a very heart connection with India and with the Brahma Kumaris. Yes.
Oh, beautiful.
Ma'am, I'm telling about the stories of Panchatantra. It's a very nice.
Type it into the chat room so that we're very clear on what we're looking for. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's a very traditional stories. If you have any question about your life, you can get the answers from them.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, share that so that we have that information. That's beautiful.
Yes,
Thank you.
The story of, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Type it right in. Now, my suggestion is that we use our last couple of minutes with everybody just having some closing thoughts. Max, you want to start?
Do we lose Max?
No, I'm here. Sure thing.
Max actually likes to think about things.
He does, yeah.
He actually thinks, right?
I'm just like, I just wanted to say, I feel the fact that I'm even here says something, that we're doing this intergenerationally, that we are sharing our stories with each other, which is the main point of this. And if there's anything that I can tell you to take home, it's just to be aware of your stories and how to best share them.
Definitely. Boy, I don't know if I can top that, Max. That was pretty good. That was kind of my message anyways, is be sure you know your story and don't be afraid of sharing your story with others, because your story is just as important as a president's story, the president of the United States or the president of your country or a famous singer, songwriter, actor. Your story is just as important, and don't let that get lost. Marge?
Oh, I was waiting for somebody else.
Well, we only have 2 minutes left, so.
Well, let's open it. Ramesh, anybody else want to, Nijera? Let's hear some other voices.
Please be sure to check out our website. Please be sure. And any one of us are happy to have conversation with you.
All right, well, if there's a last word, then I would love to have a last word.
Okay.
My last word is, this is a passion project for me, because who's going to tell your story and get it right? Who's going to be the one that makes it the real story? We are learning so much about stories we never knew. I used to teach women in politics, and I taught women in politics both at Harvard University, and I had no idea that 10 years before Seneca Falls, which was our big women in politics experience in the United States.
At 25 seconds, Marge.
that there was an untold story. I didn't know it. So know our untold stories, and thank you so much for being with us. It was fun.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.